I saw an agent post something in our coaching community, and he started talking about, okay, what's the real reason why sellers hire an agent? And so I think a lot of agents get confused on what matters versus what the seller leads them to believe that matters. And here's what I mean by this. I would venture to argue, Ben, that most agents believe that they have to go in there with this laundry list of items, of bullets, of all the things they're going to do to get the home sold in order to win the listing. And the thing is, there's no consumers that care about what you're going to do to sell the home, the minutia of it. They care about the outcome. They care about moving from this place to this place in the most effective, efficient way possible with the least headache, the least pain in the ass, if you will. And the challenge, which we're going to talk about today, in going into these appointments, talking about, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do X, I'm going to do Y, I'm going to do drone photos, I'm going to do 3D pictures, I'm going to do floor plans, I'm going to do all these different things, is it starts to commoditize the agent. And the issue with that, which I'm going to unpack here in just a minute, is it puts into the mind of the seller that that's what's important. So they train the seller, Ben, on saying, okay, that must be what I should be asking every agent, which creates this cycle.
Yeah.
And so new agents that get into the business and they go on a listing appointment with a seller, and the seller says, well, what are you going to do to sell my house? The agent argues with me as the coach to say, no, coach, you're wrong. They do care about what I'm going to do to get their property sold. And the argument again is, well, if I were to ask that agent a question, and you go and get your a root canal done because you're in tons of pain in your tooth, it's like, do you just want the pain gone as quickly, as efficiently as possible? Or do you care more about the dentist saying, well, we're going to get a needle. It's going to be about this long.
Yeah.
We're actually going to put that into your jawbone to numb everything up. And then I'm going to take this drill. This drill's about this big. And we're going to start to cut open we don't care about that. So that's the context in which I want to have this conversation. What are your initial thoughts on that?
It's funny you share that story, because the first thing that popped into my head was I just locked my keys in my car. I have one key for it. It's an older car, so it's like I didn't have the key fob or whatever. It's locked in there. And I called the number right on my phone, got a guy. He shows up in this old beat up minivan. He comes up and he's like, he gave me his phone, iPad, whatever, and it said, hey, it's going to be $350 and I can get your car open. And I'm like, great, how can you do it? And he's like, I think so. I think I can get it open. And I'm like, sure, yeah, just get it done. I sign off. He walks up to the car. He puts a key in. He literally it's two tools, turned it, opened it, handed me the key. It's 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Right? And I think to your point with the dentist story, it's like we get so caught up in the van. How nice does my van need to be that I pull up to the customer? What does my logo on the side need to be?
Yeah.
But all I cared about was how quick can I get into that car?
That's right.
Imagine if my son was locked in there, or if there was a real emergency, you could not care less about his van, what tools he used. All you care about is how quick can you get me the result?
Yeah.
And that is exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah. And so let's get into this a little bit deeper, because if I'm listening to our conversation and I'm an agent, I'm going to say, I kind of hear you guys out, but I don't know if I buy it. It's funny. I remember coaching an agent who was on this big, really successful team. And he said, Brandon, I've got a real issue kind of with what you're teaching me. And you're teaching me to be outcome focused. You're teaching me how to communicate the seller's desired outcome, when this whole time I've been in real estate, I was on this very successful team. We took a lot of listings. And what I was taught was to go in there and share pages and pages of all the things we're going to do to get the seller's home, such that the seller was impressed, so much so that the seller would decide to hire us. And so I've been taught to spend 45 minutes talking about aerial photos, open houses, drone photos, the type of flyers we're going to do, the web traffic that we're going to have, the social media campaigns that we're going to do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the first place to start is, okay, remember what I said at the beginning of this episode, and that is the reason the seller believes that they should be asking the agent that question, thus why most agents are trained to give answers like that, is because agents for a long time have failed to actually communicate any real value. And so what they're forced to do when asked, hey, what are you going to do to sell my house? It's a literal question, but what the consumer cares about is a gut feeling. Do I feel that by hiring you, by having this conversation today, that you're the person who can actually help me get from this home to this home, get from this family event to where I want to go in the most effective manner possible? And because over the years, again, the lack of the ability on most agents to communicate that value, which we're going to talk about in today's episode, what we teach, so that the audience can say, okay, give me a little bit of context, gentlemen. Don't be so vague. I'm going to give that context in just a minute. Most what we call mules go on a listing presentation. They pull out, I'm looking for something. They pull out, oh, look at this. This is perfect. They pull out their little clipboard, right? Ironically enough. And they start to say, okay, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, I'm going to do this thing. 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 And the seller turns around and asks them a question. They say, okay, well, what do you charge for something like that? To which the agent responds with, well, I charge X percent. And the seller starts to think to themselves, okay, professional photos, open house, you're going to post on, what'd you say, social media, Facebook, Instagram stuff? Okay. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. Okay. They start to, they're calculating this in their head. They say, I'm going to sell my $500,000 house. You charge 6%. Man, that seems expensive. Can you do any better than that? I mean, I talked to another agent who said they're going to do the same thing you're going to do, and they charge a lot less than you. That puts that agent in a very, very difficult spot, because here's what they're doing. They're putting themselves in a position to be commoditized, where the seller, most agents say, okay, I want to differentiate myself. In order to be better, you must be different. And if you put your features and benefits in front of a seller, and those features and benefits are the same as everybody else, because that's the issue that most agents have. It's like, you're not coming up with something that other agents aren't talking about. When you get into vomit mode and you start to just, vomit features and benefits on a seller, to you, they might sound different. To the seller, that sounds like the same thing that everybody else is saying. Well, Johnny at Remax pretty much is doing the same thing, and he charges 5%. Well, we appreciate the time, Ben, but we're going to interview some other agents to see what they have to offer and what they charge. What are we competing on? Price. We're not competing on value. We're competing on price. We're competing on what features and benefits do you offer and what do you charge? Versus the next mule, what features and benefits do you charge or do you offer and what do you charge? And it's the agent's fault. We've trained the seller to do that to us. And so the seller doesn't know any better. So they go and meet with one mule after the next. Give me your features and benefits list. That's why you have a lot of sellers. Well, can you just email me what you do? Can you send me an email with what you have to offer? What they mean is the features and benefits, because it's the agents that put that in the mind of the seller. That makes sense.
100%.
And then they just match up the features and benefits, and guess what? Who wins the business? The one who charges the least.
Because we've commoditized ourselves.
That's right.
Right? And we are in sales, right? We're having a sales conversation. We're trying to close them. And what we're missing often, I'd love your opinion too, is we're not taking the logic and converting it into an emotional feeling. So when they don't get that emotional, because we buy, everybody knows, we buy emotionally, we justify logically. So like in the seller's mind, subconsciously, whether they know it or not, that's what's happening. I didn't have an emotional feeling about what's going to happen. Now I need to justify this. So price obviously is one way to justify it, to make that logical decision. But another that I think often people think is an objection or a roadblock that doesn't come up for a lot of people we work with because they do this correctly is, well, Brandon, how many homes have you sold?
Yeah.
Brandon, I used to get this when I first started before I had these skills is how old are you? How long have you been in the business? Right?
It's a great point.
And it's so funny that once you get the other stuff right, I still look pretty young. I don't hear that ever anymore.
Yeah.
Nobody asks me that because they feel, it's a feeling, it's an emotion.
That's right.
Man, Brandon, you know what you're talking about.
That's
I
right.
really believe you.
Yeah.
And they don't care as much about the price, how many homes you've sold, how long you've been in the business. It's irrelevant, which is somewhat frustrating because once you start selling a ton of homes, you start having a lot of success, nobody asks anymore.
That's a really good point. Well, to that point, and we're going to give the audience, I promise you guys stick with us for a second. I'll get into the meat and potatoes in a second. We were going through our brand new listing presentation with somebody yesterday, the day before. You and I were doing it together. And this person, from the outside, kind of looking in, they said, hey, can I take a peek at it before we get into it? And I remember, what did he say? He said, I was really concerned before I actually got into the conversation. And once we got into the conversation, the person was like, wow, I can really tell you know what you're doing. It was a gut feeling. He couldn't measure it on a spreadsheet. I didn't mention one feature or benefit. None, zero. And let's get into what we mean by this, all right? So we talk to agents all the time about like, how are you showing up to an appointment? Are you showing up as the mule or the magician? And what we mean by that is this. The mule goes in there and says, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, look how hard I'm going to work for you. I'm going to do this. We just talked about that, right? We're going to do this, all these different things. And the seller says, well, what do you charge? And you become a commodity. That's the mule. The magician goes in there, okay, and I'll give the story, the actual dentist story, so that the people listening or watching to this on the podcast can really have the aha moment. And then we'll get into the details of it. So the story goes like this. There's a factory worker. He makes $25 an hour. He's got this toothache, right? It's been killing him for days and days and days and days. Finally, on the last day, he can't sleep. He's in so much pain, Ben. He says, I have to get this thing done. I have to get this thing done. And he goes and sees the dentist, right? He goes and sees two dentists, matter of fact. The first dentist he goes and sees, he's like, Doc, I'm in a lot of pain. I really, really got to get this thing fixed. I can't sleep. I can't work. Like, I am in so much pain. I got to get this thing fixed. To which Dr. A, the mule, responds with what we kind of talked about at the beginning of the episode. He says, okay, well, we got a couple options here. Take a seat. This might take a while. He takes out his clipboard. He starts to go through all this stuff, right? And it's like 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes in the meeting. And the guy's like, Doc, can you just do this thing? Can you just get it? Well, hold on. And he starts to go, well, we can use this type of medication. We can use this type of medication. We can do this. Doc, I just got to get this thing fixed. What do you charge for all this? The guy's like, it's probably going to be about, $2,500. The guy's like, man, that's expensive. Let me go and talk to another dentist. Guy leaves this hour-long meeting with this dentist, goes and sees this other dentist. Yeah, just in so much pain. He just wants the pain to go away. He goes and sees this other dentist. We'll call this the magician. And he says, Doc, I got this pain. I need it gone, et cetera, et cetera. Can you help me? Doc responds. He says, yeah, it's no big deal. We'll get you in and out of here. Take about 15 minutes. Man, what do you charge for this? Well, we charge $2,500. Man, that's a lot of money. It'd take me a couple weeks to pay for that. Doctor said, well, I can take a lot longer if you want. Right? Just like the mule. Yep. And this guy says, no, Doc. No. Go ahead. Do the procedure. Take care of it. I just want the pain gone. In our world of selling real estate, when you really listen to the story, that's what's happening. Is one person shows up as the mule, and they communicate in such a way that makes it seem to the seller such a difficult process. Tons of anxiety, tons of stress, tons of worry, tons of doubt, because of the agent going there and vomiting all over the seller and all this stuff. Where we teach agents to show up as the magician, to create a world where we're communicating about the outcome. Here's what we're going to do for you, and we stay out of the how. And then the seller says, wow, that just feels so much easier. We've created this tangible feeling of value that you can't measure, right? Because value is an intangible thing. It's increasing certainty while decreasing risk, which is a feeling. And so how do we do that, right? So the people are like, well, yeah, I get it. Well, how do you do that? Well, we show, we don't tell. We show, we don't tell. So in a listing conversation with a prospective seller, rather than sit there and vomit and tell the seller, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and you sound just like everybody else. Your value is diminishing as you keep vomiting. The longer you talk, value goes down. We show the seller as an example. We'll give one tangible example. Maybe you can give an example as well. One of the things that we teach agents, and one of the things that we do in our new listing presentation, which we'll maybe share with the world one day, is our active listing analysis, where we actually, number one, we show the seller the home in person. Let's go and visit the homes that we're going to compete with. Like, we're going to leave the seller's house, get in the car, drive to the 3 homes that we're going to compete with, so that the seller, for the very first time, number one, no other agent has ever even considered that. No other agent has ever given that recommendation. And so when our agents that we coach go and even if the seller doesn't take them up on it, Ben, and they recommend it, the seller says, that makes a lot of sense. Let's go and look at the competition. Let's go look, feel what it's like to be a buyer, to walk through the homes that they're going to walk through, and they're going to walk through yours too. So that's number one. Number two.
And the other thing I'll add to that is just you as the agent will 100% and go visit these. And when you sit there and they said, hey, I was too busy to do that, you can point to it and say, well, what you can't see in this picture is the way it smells, right?
Great point. So you're meaning that even if the seller doesn't go, a well-trained agent is previewing the active listings prior to the listing appointment.
And they can point it out and say, hey, this is what we might not see that those buyers will see, and this is something we can prepare for.
That's a great point. And just for the newer agent that doesn't really get that, what Ben's talking about is, and what you're talking about is, the difference between looking at a photo and things looking pretty versus being in the home and none of the windows open. You don't get the same feeling through the photo. It's like, well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I've walked to this home, although it looks pretty, I went to go open all the windows, and because someone caulked them incorrectly, they're all cracking. I can't get them open.
Yeah.
And so that would be an example, okay? Now, the seller could feel that too. All right. As we do that, that's number one. Number two, just as an example, there's many things that we do in this conversation, is we take them through what we call the buyer comparison exercise. And for the very first time, we're able to actually have the seller put a buyer hat on and understand clearly, Ben, because they go through the exercise at the listing appointment on what buyers are doing to make the ultimate decision on which home they're going to write an offer on. And the seller says, wow, Ben, I've never seen it so clearly before. We show, we don't tell. We do this through the entire thing, that by the end, there's a gut feeling that everything you just walked me through for the last 45 minutes, it's clear that you know what you're doing. It's clear that you're the type of agent we want to represent us in the sale of the home. And guess what? We didn't ever have to get into the features and benefit vomit because it's not moving the needle. Nobody cares about that. What they care is, do I feel that you're the type of agent that if I decide to list my house with, that can go out there and represent us, put our best foot forward in the marketplace? Do I believe that you're the guy, you're the girl, you're the agent who can help us get to our desired outcome? Yes or no? Do I feel that way? And you giving me a laundry list of these things doesn't move the needle. You know what I mean?
100%. Because what these exercises do, the key thing is they, for the first time, are discovering for themselves versus saying, well, Brandon, what do you think it's worth?
Great point.
What do you think it should be priced at? And now, guess who gets hung out to dry when it doesn't sell for that price? Brandon, this was your opinion. You told me this was the price. So what you will do, what you will learn, there's a bunch of other things that we do, but this exercise will help you, or rather the seller, choose the price and own the price that the home is going to sell for, and it's going to be a price that actually will cause it to sell.
Yeah, well, I think what you just said is the exact point, and I'll end with this, is that the whole goal of a well-trained agent who has these conversations at a listing appointment is to get the seller to discover for themselves everything that they need to make a good decision. It's not you telling, it's not the agent. This is the biggest issue with our industry right now, is agents are thinking that they need to learn on what they need to say, what they need to tell the seller to convince the seller that they're the right agent. It's the wrong approach. You're going to lose. You need to learn how to ask the right questions to get the seller to discover that you're the right agent on their own. And you need to get the seller, you need to ask the right questions to get the seller to discover the right listing price on their own.